Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra book. It's witty, thought-provoking, sassy, everything we want in a good book. Let's begin. This section was titled On Scholars. So let's see how he lays into us. Let's begin. Bismillah. As I lay asleep, a sheep ate of the ivy wreath on my brow, ate, and said, Zarathustra is no longer a scholar. Said it, and strutted away proudly. A child told it to me, and liked to lie here, where the children play, beside the broken wall, among thistles and red poppies. I am still a scholar to the children, and also to the thistles and red poppies. They are innocent even in their malice. But to the sheep, I am no longer a scholar. Thus my lot decrees it. Bless it. So the sheep, I think this is a two-folded word here, as in the innocent people, but also the masses who are very well spooked and led quite easily. The sheeple, we would call it, as some people comment. Now, the children are innocent and they're always observant, and they don't have malicious intent yet. But the sheeple, they turn away really easy. So he's kind of mentioning a little mini boycott here. For this is the truth. I have moved from the house of the scholars, and I even banged the door behind me. My soul sat hungry at their table too long. I am not, like them, trained to pursue knowledge as if it were nut-cracking. Trained to pursue knowledge as if it were nut-cracking. The symbolism of the nuts and brains is interesting because we would say he's a good seed. We have phrases in everyday language that compare the brain to a nut, and if you look at a walnut, it kind of looks like a mini brain when you first crack it open. It's kind of creepy, but describing knowledge as something that you crack open to instead of something that you delicately pursue with passion, is hinting at his relationship with knowledge itself, how he views it. Maybe he thinks the scholars, they don't really appreciate what it is they're studying. They're so formulaic. I love freedom in the air over the fresh earth. Rather would I sleep on ox hides than on their decorums and respectabilities. Ox hides? I like to sit on cow pelts. Freedom and the air over the fresh earth. So the outdoors, instead of being in a stuffy classroom, under contract, censored, on fine pillows, said in the ruggedness to kind of pursue the path of knowledge you want to take. I am too hot and burned by my own thoughts. Often it nearly takes my breath away. That I must go out into the open and away from all dusty rooms. The dusty rooms is a good point. Just craving to be out of the cramped spaces. But they sit cool in the cool shade, in everything they want to be mere spectators, and they beware of sitting where the sun burns on the steps, like those who stand in the street and gape at the people who pass by. They too wait and gape at thoughts that others have thought. Oh my goodness. You see that? So, when you're in the shade relaxing and reading, it's nice, but the heat of knowledge, sometimes it's going to be a bit uncomfortable. And people who are like, don't read this and don't read that, those are the types that like to remain in the comfortable shade. And they have their purpose. But people who are like, okay, let me see what this says, how do I deal with it, who aren't afraid of mental challenges, they don't fear different groups of knowledge as much. Because if you think about the people who had to figure out how to take a baby out surgically those first few times. To others, it was probably crazy and they probably lost so many women, but then it got perfected over time because someone had to dare to push the knowledge boundary. And now how many children are born that way instead of just both dying, right? Something to think about. This reminds me of Samuel Tarly when he goes to the Citadel where they train the maesters, and how he's trying to get them to do stuff, but they don't really seem too interested. They're just with their dusty books, and there's even a comment where he's like, careful, the dust mites on the paper pages like to bite. You know, when Samuel is like looking at all the books. And they are in that place, and it's shaded, obviously, because it's indoors. But they are different types of stewards of knowledge. And what's interesting is when Sam, for example, takes his father's sword and leaves, he tells Gilly, I'm tired of reading about like the deeds of other men, like the actions or something of other men. It hints about, instead of reading about others' lives, I want to live my life. And Sam is like the scholar bunch. And he wanted to be a maester, where you get your formal training. I mean, he eventually becomes a maester in the end, but it just goes to show how there's a lot of ways to get knowledge. And so, gape at thoughts that others have thought. I think this is why so many books now are not really anything special. Like the New York Times is heavily controlled and political. A lot of the politicians don't write books themselves. They hire ghostwriters from colleges. So, like, if Hillary Clinton writes a book, I want to see, like, what is this crazy witch thinking? But she just has someone else write it. Their voice isn't there, and you can tell. And you're like, be you. Like, say your thoughts. But people don't want to. And a lot of right-wing conservatives, they'll always parrot each other's lines. And I have a Logan Hall, there's a tweet I screenshot a while back that I'm going to put on my blog eventually. It's in the pile of things I want to put up on there and discuss, but he said there's not a single right-wing influencer who's had an original thought. That they kind of all just parrot Jack Posobiec, and like they just parrot things. They go on that thought. Kind of like how Pearl Davis, she just repeats what the Red Pillars already have said. That's what it is. She doesn't have an original thought. And it's just trolling and farm bait raging and all that. So, to have an original thought takes a lot more work. You gotta get out of those dusty rooms. You gotta have both, I'd argue. The times of solitude, where your mind is at rest. It's like when you're in the shower or you're laying in your bed, it's floods of thoughts come because you have stillness. And now your mind's like, what do we think about? What do we think about? And that can cause insomnia. But if you go on walks, you go by the ocean, or have a hobby, all of a sudden you're allowing your mind to kind of express itself, thought dump, and then be able to let you sleep, inshallah. Stimulation, and then lack of stimulation. But there are those who are just spectators, as he says. They, like, people watch only. I mean, I kind of do that, but I don't have a problem leading either. As in, I'm going to initiate doing something. I don't just stand around like a deer in the headlights. So you can see from both sides what he's saying. If you seize them with your hands, they raise a cloud of dust like flour bags, involuntarily. But who could guess that their dust comes from grain and from the yellow delight of summer fields? When they pose as wise, their little epigrams of truth chill me. Their little epigrams of truth chill me. So the dust from grain. So the sort of dust from summer fields, traveling, getting that pollen on you. Dust from grinding grain. Instead of dust from other stuff, I guess. Dust mites and dust bunnies. Their wisdom often has an odor as if it came from the swamps. And verily I have also heard frogs croak out of it. They are skillful and have clever fingers. Why would my simplicity want to be near their multiplicity? Ooh. Simplicity near multiplicity. Duplicitous. Isitus. All threading and knotting and weaving their fingers understand. Thus they knit the socks of the spirit. Now, mentioning socks of the spirit, I want you to think about when you have a nice pair of warm, cozy socks, your feet feel good and it affects you. You got wet socks, like you just stepped in a puddle. That terrible, like, ooh, it's like a distracting feeling. So, you'd be surprised how much your socks play a role in how you feel. They are good clockworks, but take care to wind them correctly. Then they indicate the hour without fail, and make a modest noise. They work like mills and like stamps. Throw down your seed corn to them, and they will know how to grind it small, and reduce it to white dust. They watch each other closely and mistrustfully. Inventive and petty cleverness. Ooh, they watch each other closely and mistrustfully. Inventive and petty cleverness. That's a lot of YouTube. There's legit criticisms, and then, like, Twitter is a very strong example of that. They are like, gotcha, I'm gonna say this. And, like, they want to make up drama out of the air when it's not really due. Or they make a mountain out of a molehill. So, that's a good point. They wait for those whose knowledge walks on lame feet. Like spiders, they wait. That's true. I agree with that. They're like up there in the corner. The other day I was watching a bug with wings got in the web of the spider in the corner window of my kitchen on the outside. And he's flailing about and the spider's like... Eventually it was weird. He got free. The spider didn't build his web very well. But they wait in and they get in their lunch. And it's really trippy when you watch it. Just how they can be so still for so long. Not even a yawn or scratching their back. Some of them are just like, eh. And so when you're lame, you got lame feet, you're like, you're stumbling. And there's that spider there, it's ready to wrap you up in its web of lies. I have always seen them carefully preparing poison. It's interesting, preparing poison. So the spider carefully prepares its web. And textures such as that, they're definitely something that are prepared with care, aren't they? Pretty freaky. Your knowledge is prepared with care, and the wicked one is also preparing their nasty potion carefully as well. It's really trippy to think about. Chemistry, right? Both metaphorical and literal. They always put on gloves of glass to do it. They also know how to play with loaded dice, and I have seen them play so eagerly that they sweated. We are alien to each other, and their virtues are even more distasteful to me than their falseness and their loaded dice. So their virtues are even more distasteful to me than their falseness. So it's the lies don't make him disturbed as much as what they stand on, what they claim is virtue. So he dislikes them, not just for their bad behavior, but for what they measure as good. And when I lived with them, I lived above them. That is why they developed a grudge against me. They did not want to hear how someone was living over their heads, and so they put wood and earth and filth between me and their heads. Ooh, that's interesting. Really getting at the ankle biting and the envy. Some people really are disturbed by hierarchy. I'm not. I don't mind people having a different social class than me. So the higher up you go, the less air there is. You know, it's a crazy. I wouldn't even in the middle is where I'd want to be. Wouldn't want to be right on the bottom, holding up that pyramid. You know, you go all the way to the top. At a certain point, a certain juncture, that's when the pulling comes up. Like, now they feel so close to the top. Who wants to be the one with all the sky above them? Just one more step, 2 more steps, all this. And the one on the top has the best view, but below them all they see is countless enemies. No thanks. And then when that person comes up and poof, whoa, just that's it for you. Being on the top is nothing but difficulty. Thus they muffled the sound of my steps, and so far I've been heard least well by the most scholarly. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, when they try to... That's kind of like what social media censorship is. Instead of uniting the scholarly types, they shadow ban them, suppress them, and they push up midgets doing OnlyFans. Between themselves and me they laid all human faults and weaknesses. False ceilings, they call them in their houses. And yet I live over their heads with my thoughts. Ooh. And yet I live over their heads with my thoughts. Some of these are just really bars, I gotta say. He's really good at these witticisms. Because to physically live, and then there's others who are mentally just like, I'm over here. And not that fake Instagram, like, live your best life. Not like that kind. The kind where it's actually real. And it's not just some narcissistic woman with a bunch of Botox and daddy issues ranting in a reel on Instagram. And even if I wanted to walk upon my own mistakes, I would still be over their heads. For men are not equal. Thus speaks justice. And what I want they would have no right to want. Thus spoke Zarathustra. That's awesome. That's the best thing I've heard. We are... That line right there is insightful. All men are created equal. It's like under the law. Right? There's such a double edge to that word equality. We're not equal in our traits, in our habits, in our moods, in our greatness, in our depravity, but under the law. So it should be all men are created equal under the law. We are all given opportunities to do good equally if we only take it and take advantage of opportunities given to us. But the feministic equality of 50-50, human rights people will say it's about, human dignity. So, but a lot of them want to chip away at hierarchy because they hate an aristocratic class. Because secretly, the atheist knows they have to, if they kill religion, the compulsion to charity is a bit more difficult to push in people once they feel like there's no reward for it. Whoever gives a goodly loan to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to get tenfold rewards. So as a Muslim, you do charity, and plus charity, sadaqah, zakah, those are very important components of Islam. Zakah is a pillar of Islam. Think about that. Helping the poor. So we know already there's not financial equality, and there isn't a hierarchical structure of churchiness, as in like, the Catholic Church has the Pope, the cardinals, the bishops, blah 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 blah. Okay, there's a hierarchy, right? We have noble scholars and ulama, but it's just a little bit different type of structure. So scholars will have different ranges, right? And if you're already in a different range, you're not exactly equal. But if you're running a business and the dishwasher's objecting, but your server's objecting and your bartender's objecting, well, they're all house staff, not in the managerial grouping, so they're pretty much equal. So the word equal has such this hot coal energy to it when you really examine it. What did you think? He's gotten some good ones, man. I really do enjoy reading him. Wonder what it would have been like to talk to him before he got syphilis from a whore and went insane. He was wise, yet he slept with a whore and got an STD that eroded his brain. So he couldn't control his lust. And the devil got him. Yep. That's how you look at it. They watch each other closely and mistrustfully, inventive in petty cleverness. We have to watch out for that. When we're being petty and when you're like, hold up, what? Right? But there are people who are consistent contrarians. There's been some people, they're not Muslim, but just other kinds of content creators. They're just always up in someone's business and drama. And I'm thinking to myself, no knowledge is being shared. But it's like, doesn't this person get tired of searching for problems? Being offended, like they're constantly offended. Like, if you want to critique, I think that's fine, that's totally normal. Because you can't just be like a one-mood pacifist with glazed eyes. That's not very human. But there are people who are like, so-and-so did this, 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 and that. You know. There's a difference between like reporting and critiquing and analysis and just pettiness. And there's a big distinction in that. I think Hunter Avalon, he's a guy who, when he critiques Pearl, someone who I really don't like, he just says a bunch of insults, but he doesn't really refute her points. When I write about her on my blog, like, I go in details, I bring up Islam, I try to, like, have some, spirituality there, right? Some empathy, I try to see it from her view, also acknowledge her just rage baiting, grifting. I try to be substantive, like, I try to be substantive in my critiques, and I don't just only do insults. I may do some, but all he does is like, yeah, stupid, and you're like, that's kind of petty, and you're just kind of searching for views. And if you really didn't like her and what she was saying, your brain would literally not be able to hold back the thoughts. But when you're forcing it, then you have to just say insults because there's nothing really to say to grasp from. So when Nietzsche mentions that's who I think of. I think Hassan Piker as well. Inventing drama. Like, he's very lazy kind of sometimes. Like, he streams a lot, and that's probably why he gets burnt out. But the people who just watch others and then just complain, and they're like, they gotta complain and rage in order to keep themselves relevant as consistent contrarians. And the originality, because remember, he mentioned gape at the thoughts that others have thought. I try to stay authentic and I try to be myself, and some people think I'm weird, but that's okay. But I am kind of a hermit, so when he says here, dusty rooms, you're like, okay, you gotta go out, and you can be a hermit outdoors, amongst natures. You see those types all the time. The scholar has to make sure, from what I get from this, is to have the balance. And this is why I think of the Prophet, peace be upon him, when he was talking to the Bedouins. Because when he was talking to the Bedouins, these are people who are very rough. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, had to go out in the heat and talk to people. And there's the shade, but you gotta not just stay in your refinement. It's nice when you have a place of safety to study, but you can't go too far away from the masses. I think there was even Albert Pike, who's someone I don't agree with, but in his book Morals and Dogma, he said some line that I'm paraphrasing, which was about someone has to listen to the gander of the geese and the honking of the gooses once in a while. Like, you have to be able to handle that. If you think also of Trump, I don't like him, but when he deals with a confrontational reporter and he's doing just fine, you're like, oh, he's used to it. You're a nasty woman, I can't do a Trump impression, but you get my point. Whereas Biden totally hides. His whole campaign, he's hiding. He's in the basement. He can't talk. He's frail, brittle, cowardly, And so you start thinking to yourself, Nietzsche has a point if you look at our real world, what he's getting at. And so this to me just sounds like he's his own scholar. He's not the institutionalized, formalized scholar where you get knowledge from. And I think a lot of us who were like the Harry Potter generation, you want to have and be like the Professor McGonagalls and Dumbledores. I know I did. The Gandalfs. You want wisdom. But Gandalf was out and about on horseback, like with nature, going to the Shire with the hobbits. He wasn't all up in the tower like Saruman, gazing into that circular thing, getting weird. You know, you gotta go out. You have to breathe that fresh air. It's like, but you can't be the rugged dog. Zeno, I think was his name. Zeno of Cyprus? I don't remember. Zeno. He was the one, the most famous thing about him was he liked to be kind of in the streets, and he lived like in this weird barrel, and he had all these stray dogs around him, and he was kind of like a cynic. And Alexander the Great came and asked him like, oh, like, noble so-and-so, is there anything I can get you? Or I'm paraphrasing, I'm butchering it. I read it a long time ago. But basically he told him, yes, you can, he was, I'm butchering this, but he told Alexander to move because he was blocking like something, you know? Look it up. Zeno the Cynic and Alexander. But he was just somebody who wasn't impressed with Alexander just because of his status. He's like, yes, you can move out of my way. Like, he was sitting, but he was blocking his view, or like shade or something. But it was something very witty. And so, you don't want to just be like that, in a way, in my opinion, someone who's just become dirty and uncouth, like the Babas of India. Those weird, Aghoris, the cannibalistic guys, and they have their dingling out, and they're covering themselves in ash, and they're smoking ganja all day, and they're just, I saw one tweet I shared on the community tab where a guy was laying on like some uncomfortable thing in the street, so he doesn't have a job, you know, he's not being a scholar, they're torturing themselves, like laying on like pointy needles and hard surfaces, and being totally weird, in my opinion. You know, so there's a balance of being too out there and then too in closed. So when I read Nietzsche, I'm thinking of all the worldly examples of people we can look to who've kind of gone to a fringe, or who've stayed so intertwined in their own beingness that they no longer are flexible and growing. So it's almost like he takes pride in not being the institutionalized, verified scholar. Although you can understand why you'd want a curriculum and a format and stuff like that, because people will innovate, twist, and distort. So you want to preserve a chain of knowledge, but you also want to give people the ability to actually have critical thinking and have an original thought, you know. So I can see the balance. And that's what Nietzsche does in his writing, which is great. It's too bad he couldn't control his lust and allowed himself to get a gnarly STD. May Allah protect us from that. But very interesting section. I hope you enjoyed. And if you'd like to support my content, you can do so via my blog, which is www.subscribestar.com/Milahan Archive. Hope to see you there.